All right, everybody. Welcome to Pastorpod. There we go. Got the tunes going a little bit. Awesome. And the audience goes wild.
Artless.io.
And the trees behind me. All right. Always a pleasure to be with you guys. Listen, I did want to share with you a little bit about the trip. So we met with 3 different pastors and their families, plus an elder and his wife, and had phone conversations with another pastor who we were supposed to meet with, but he had blown out his Achilles tendon and was laid up and then on pain meds, so he just felt, loopy-doopy and not good. So we didn't bother him. We just talked on the phone a little bit. But yeah, good trip. Plus got to see some family too. My cousins, we actually went to their church. His pastor is one of the guys that we encourage and hang out with once in a while. His name is Les Moore. And I want to plug his book, Operational Ministry, The Structure and Operations of the Church and Functional Roles of Church Officers. It's Les's take on biblically what offices are there in the church in terms of leadership based on giftedness, and how do they interrelate? How do they function together? I think it's very well done. I haven't read the whole book, but what I have read is good, and knowing less, I'm not surprised. Good man. So we had services there Sunday, hung out with them, hung out with my cousin. Got to see my uncle, who's 89. Hadn't seen him in a while, and I really wanted to make sure we got that in this trip. Many of you probably know I grew up south of Buffalo, and so this was a homecoming as well as a ministry trip for me. Got to see my uncle, my other cousins, cousins on my dad's side, and the old farm where my dad and grandfather and great-grandfather all lived. It's been in the family for over 100 years, and that was cool. And one other thing, one of the couples who support us in ministry, who we spent some time with as well, were married in the same hall where Karen and I were married. Was an old iron workers hall. It's now a banquet hall in Buffalo area, West Seneca, New York. And we went to the hall and took pictures in front of it. And that's the first time Karen and I have been back there in probably 38 years. We'll be married 38 years in August. So that was kind of cool. Anyway, enough about all that. Just a good trip. But one of the things that I've been thinking about is how often we encounter pastors who just won't, or feel they can't take a break. They just, it just isn't in their DNA, or they feel it's not feasible for them to take time off, whether it's a weekly Sabbath break, whether it's a vacation for a couple weeks, or heaven forbid, here's the big one. This is like, heart attack time, that they would actually take a sabbatical every 7 or 8 or 10 years. It depends on what denomination you talk to, but some of them say every 7 you should do it. Some say every 10. Regardless, it's amazing how many pastors just absolutely won't consider that. And I'm one of them, okay? Full disclosure here, I'm guilty as charged. I've been in vocational ministry for 30 plus years, and I have never had a sabbatical. And a lot of that was my own doing. Yeah, I could argue there were church circumstances, and there were probably 10 or 15 of those years I was bivocational and had other jobs and, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, I used to make fun of people doing this. Say, what's wrong with you, man? You got to take a break? You need a month off, 2 months off? What? But looking back, I think I hurt myself, my family, and my church at times by not taking that rest. Good morning, dudes. Your hidden secret identity, yes. Anyway, I really want to encourage those of you who are watching now, listening later, who download this as a podcast. Please, if you're a pastor, consider what I'm saying here. And if you're a church member, put a full court press on your pastor to make sure, number one, he takes a day off every week. Number two, that he takes a vacation every year. And number three, if he's been at this for 7 or 10 years, that a sabbatical is something that's part of the plan. And you have to plan for it. Church has to plan for it. Members have to support it. And by support it, I mean, financially prepare for it, but also be in a place where when he does it, you're not calling him every 10 minutes, right? I have a question. What color car should I buy? You can't do that stuff, right? If you want him to have a true rest and a sabbatical that means something, that actually produces some good fruit. And I think to do that, the answer is found in Ephesians, meaning that all the different gifts and functions and offices of the church are functioning. Thus, I thought it was a good day to mention Les's book, right? Operational Ministry by Les Moore. And whether we use Les's book or other books on this subject, understanding how no church should be a one-man show, understanding how the church should interrelate and interact is critical, so that, at the end of the day, when a pastor needs a break or takes a break, whether it's one day or a couple of weeks or a couple of months, the church doesn't fall apart, because we are, in fact, operating biblically. We are doing things the way God intended. So, I want to go through Ephesians 4 real quick and just, share some thoughts. Jim says, being bivocational makes it hard to do. Yeah, man, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. But you know what? I talked to one pastor recently, and I said, look, you can't probably get 2 months off your job. I get it. But can you take 2 months off your church job, even though you're still working your secular job, and let other people fill in for you and do some stuff so that you get a break spiritually from the demands of that ministry? And I think most of us that have held 2 or 3 jobs, had times where I had 3 jobs at once. I used to joke about, I don't know which hat I was wearing, on a given day. Get up and go to, wait, who am I now? Oh, yeah, okay. Because listen, over the years, all right, just so that you guys know I'm not blowing smoke here. I know what I'm talking about. I have sold copiers. I have painted houses. I have driven limousines and school buses. I've been a chaplain in nursing homes. I own a chaplaincy business. I have a small business I run, or own at least. I have somebody else who runs it now, but all kinds of stuff I've done. Security. I worked security at ESPN. The first book I wrote, I used to joke that ESPN paid me to write the book, because I was working for a guy who had written children's books. He was my supervisor when I was on security at a ESPN headquarters in Connecticut, and he and I were talking one night, and he was telling me about the book he'd written, a couple books, I guess. And I told him I had an idea for one, but I didn't know if I'd ever get a chance to write it. And he says, Joel, we're paying you to sit in an empty parking lot for 7 or 8 hours a night, third shift. Write your stupid book, man. And so I did. And so I tell people, Crucified Church, that book was, I was paid by ESPN to write that book. Thank you, ESPN. Jack of all trades. Yeah, master of none, for sure. So I get it, when it comes to being bivocational. But I also know that all that time, and I was doing all those jobs and pastoring at the same time, the toughest job in terms of emotional and spiritual demand, the toughest job in terms of what kept me awake at night, what occupied my thoughts even when I was at my other job or jobs, was the ministry. So being able to take a sabbatical from ministry, even if we can't from our secular job, I think is critical. So going to Ephesians 4, Paul says this. He says, therefore, I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you've been called by God. So church members, the Apostle Paul, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, ergo God is, through him, begging you to do something. I would say that's pretty important. I would say that's something worthy of note. When we're begged to live a life worthy, and we say, well, that means we should be moral, we shouldn't sin, and we should do this. And yeah, but that's not where Paul's going here. Paul's going into this idea that every one of us has a ministry. As we like to say it at our church, every member is a minister. The question is, of what? And it's based on gifts, it's based on personality, it's based on life experience, It's based on all those things combined. Our spiritual gifts, of course, our passion. What do we feel moved to do? All that together, you put it in a blender, blow it, whir it up, mix it up, and what comes out is a sense of what God's designed you to do and be. And Paul's begging you to do that, to be part of it. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowances for each other's fault because of your love. So he's getting into this body life, body ministry thing, and rightly so. He lays a foundation by saying we got to love each other, we got to be gentle, we got to be humble. And pastors, that starts with you and me. If we're not humble, we can't expect the body to be. If we're not humble, we can't expect our leaders and our board members to be. If we can't accept the fact that we're not perfect, that we're human, we're not superhuman, that we need a rest and we need a break too, then how do we expect them to ever take a rest, take a break, do a Sabbath thing when we teach on it, etc., etc., right? He says, make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, bind together with peace, binding yourselves together with peace. And then he talks about this wonderful statement of unity, which he ends in verse 6 with this idea that there's one God and Father of all, who's over all, in all, and living through you all. But then he goes into gifts, and he talks about Jesus ascending, leading a crowd of captives, and giving gifts to his people when he rose from the grave on that third day, or 50 days later, right when he went to ascended to heaven before Pentecost. I guess it was 40 days later. Actually, 50 days would be Pentecost itself. But I want to skip to verse 11. He says, the gifts Christ gave to the church, the apostles, simply put, I think, are people that are pastors to pastors. They're overseers. They may have different roles too, just like pastors do. Some of them are church planters. Some of them are district executives. Some of them are people that just go and serve. I had one pastor tell me I'm in an apostolic ministry as part of Standing Stone because I care for pastors. I encourage them. I try to support them. I tell them corny dad jokes, whatever it takes. I pray for them. Right? My wife too. So that's the apostolic ministry, is one that's over or working with multiple leaders, multiple churches. The prophets who speak words for God. They prophesy. They may have words of wisdom, words of knowledge. They may give inspired sermons that clearly are led by God. The evangelists, we know what they are. People whose primary focus is bringing people to Christ. The pastors, the shepherds, the ones who care for groups of people. And teachers. Now, the difference between preaching and teaching, I think, is simple. Preaching is motivating. It's trying to get something to change or someone to change. Teachers are trying to inform. And not necessarily, sometimes they cross over, I get that, but they're not necessarily the same. You can inform without trying to motivate or change or challenge someone, whereas pastors, preachers, I should say, are often doing that. And by the way, all those gifts, we often call them the fivefold ministry gifts, are throughout the congregation, Pastor, right? I mean, you have people who have pastoral gifts who are not pastors by title or ordination, but they can care for groups of people. They shepherd them, they love them, they pray for them, they encourage them. You have teachers who may not get up on Sunday morning in the pulpit, but they teach in classes and small groups, etc. I think most pastors know that. Getting all those to function, though, is one of the keys to being able to take a break now and then. See, when a pastor tells me he can't take a break once a week, or he can't take a vacation, or he can't ever consider a sabbatical, I say, then you need to get some people, raise up some people to help you so that you can, right? And if we're not raising those people, then we're screwing up, right? And I'm going to show you that here. He says when he says there are. Let me read it again. These are the gifts he gave to us: the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers. What's their responsibility? Verse 12. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and build up the church, the body of Christ. So the reason you and I, if you're a pastor, the reason you're a pastor is to equip people to do the work of God. And so if we say, well, I can't ever take a break because I don't have any help, then we're not equipping people to do the work of God. Now, I understand sometimes it's challenging. You got to work with what God sends you, right? And sometimes some churches and little churches in remote areas, you don't have a lot to work with. I get it. I've seen it. I understand. But we're supposed to equip God's people to do his work. And as we are, then it's easier for us to be able to let go and back off sometimes. And sharpen the saw. I love the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, years ago. He said it, didn't he? He said that one of those habits, the 7 habits, is to sharpen the saw. He said you can saw wood like crazy, and as it gets dull, that saw gets dull, you can saw harder and harder and harder and harder and harder and break a sweat. And, or you could take 5 minutes, sharpen that saw, come back and get 2 or 3 times the work done in the same time that you have remaining. So for us to be able to take a break is sharpening the saw. I'll put it this way. Taking a time to rest for Sabbath, for pastors, taking a Sabbath, taking a vacation, and then taking a sabbatical every 7 to 10 years. It's an act of love for your church. It's an act of love for your family. It's an act of respect and honor to God, because we're prepared then to do what God's given us to do. So he says when we do that, when we equip people for that ministry, verse 13, this will continue until we all come to such unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. And he says, then we'll no longer be immature like children. Some pastors, and myself too, we complain. People are so immature, I can't believe the things they do and they say. They get so caught up in such silly, crazy stuff on the internet and social media. Oh my gosh, it drives me crazy. Well, this is part of the solution, to equip them for ministry, to get them engaged in ministry. And he says, then we won't be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like the truth, like in the media every day, and the words coming out of the politicians from Washington down. Instead, he says, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. He makes the whole body fit together perfectly, as each part does its own special work that helps the other parts grow, so that the whole body is healthy and full of love. So I think this idea of equipping God's people for works of ministry and service is the key to pastors being able to take a break. And that break that we take allows us to come back stronger, more in tune with God, more on fire, more passionate, more capable. And when the head is healthy, the body tends to follow. So that's one of the things that I think has become sort of a theme in my ministry of late, is to encourage pastors to take a break and encourage people to step up, and contribute and get involved so that their pastor can take a break, feels that he can. And yeah, you may have to push him out the door to take a vacation. You may have to change the locks so he can't go in his office, whatever it takes. I'm kidding, but you may have to cajole and all that a little bit. However, it's worth it. And I highly, highly, highly encourage that. So, love to hear your thoughts. Listen, you can be part of Pastorpod by doing what some of you are doing right now, and that is typing right into the live stream here on Facebook, on the Pondering Radio page of Facebook. You can get Spreaker, as I mentioned, download it, but you can also listen live on Spreaker. So you can chat there just as well. And you don't have to look at my ugly mug on Spreaker because it's a more radio podcast format. So that's a blessing. You can write to us with snail mail. Our address is 479 New Britain Avenue, Newington, Connecticut, 06111. You can call. Our main number for the ministry is 860-500-7163, 860-500-7163. You can text us, and that number is easy to remember, too. It's 860-938-2725, 860-938-2725. Thank you, Doots. She says, I always love to tune in. And so, yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of ways to connect with us. You can email me, Joel at That's JOEL, at lifewaych.com. That's LIFEWAYCH.com. And however you do it, please talk to us. Don't leave us alone. Don't make us, feel like we're hanging out here, swinging in the breeze by ourselves. No, we love to hear from you, hear your thoughts and ideas and topics you'd love to hear us address. So every Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock, we do Pastorpod. That's where we talk with pastors. That's where we talk about pastors. That's where we talk about issues relative to church and ministry leaders, missionaries, etc. And then Thursday mornings at 9, we do pondering, which is open season pretty much. We ponder, and then we talk about whatever might be on our minds, whether it's politics, religion, what's in the news, you name it, all the above, from a, as I love to say, unabashedly, unashamedly, and unapologetically Christian perspective. And that's every Thursday at 9. Occasionally you'll catch us on WTIC in Hartford. I fill in on the Will Morati show now and again, so that's another place you can catch us. And I wanted to give you an update on my book, Things Your Pastor Would Love to Say but Can't. A look at your pastor's heart. We are in the final stages of that. I know I keep teasing with it, but it's coming. I promise it's coming. We have a draft now that is being laid out. It has been laid out. We have a PDF version of that draft that I'm just reviewing, and they're working on cover art. And once we approve that final draft and the cover, then we'll be setting a release date. So hopefully by next week, when I come on this show, we'll be able to give you a date when the book will be available through all different venues. Amazon, Christian bookstores, etc., etc. And we'll let you know about that. And I'll have PDF versions too that I can let people have that you can read through, that are far less expensive than buying the book in hard copy. I'm very excited about the book. I feel like it has something for everybody, Christians anyway. It's written for Christians to help them understand maybe a little more about their pastor and what pastor's life is like. It's written for pastors to be cathartic, maybe a little bit humorous about some of the realities. I was talking to a couple pastors this week about the movie What About Bob years ago. I mean, you guys remember that? What About Bob? Richard Dreyfuss and let's see, who was the other? I just lost it. Can't think of his name. Comedian. Anyway, they're in this movie where Richard Dreyfuss is a therapist, and he has this patient, Bob, who won't leave him alone. Constantly calling him, constantly showing up at his house, his office, the vacations he takes and everything else. And it ends up where Dreyfuss goes crazy and the patient becomes the therapist. And a lot of pastors can relate to the idea that pretty much everybody has a Bob, or maybe 2 or 3 Bobs, who just need that constant touch and contact and reassurance on every detail of life. And, we get it, and we want to be loving, but at the same time, if you allow Bob to take over, you'll go crazy. And so maybe a little of the book is cathartic that way and encouraging. So stay tuned. More to come on that. And I think that wraps things up for today anyway. Appreciate you guys joining us online. Those of you listening later, thank you. And until next Tuesday for Pastorpod, or Thursday if you want to be part of the Pondering show, I will say bye for now.
Music licensing reimagined.